Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today about cybersecurity and the new normal, and what we've been seeing at Microsoft lately regarding new cybersecurity risks, threats, and what we can do to counter those threats. You know, the reality is that COVID-19 changed many things, especially regarding cybersecurity. As we entered into the period last March, really, when people began to work from home, to go to school from home, to interact and even engage in recreation from home, we saw an incredible acceleration in the pace of the adoption of digital technologies. That is great, but it also led to a broader footprint for those with malign intent to engage in cyber attacks, in cyber crime, and we saw an increased pace in those activities as well. And in fact, what we saw was a very dramatic peak in cybercrime that used COVID-themed attacks. And you can see that represented in this slide as, and this is from data from last year, so that as the world became to recognize this particular pandemic, you know, in February, the WHO named it COVID-19 and declared it to be a pandemic March 11th. And that was right about the time we saw cyber criminals using COVID-themed attacks of various kinds as the pandemic was gaining its greatest degree of attention really around the world. And then we saw, for the most part, we saw the COVID-themed attacks reduced to an enhanced background level as part of the playbook that cyber criminals were using, along with other themes and other attacks that they used. And although there's been a few peaks since then, that's really stayed pretty much the same story since last spring. It's now part of the cyber criminal playbook to use these themes in the way that they try to phish people or lure people as part of their cybercrime attack, but it's not at a super intense level like it was last spring. We also saw, even when it was peaking, it did not increase the total volume of cybercrime as much as it just shifted the themes that the cyber criminals were using into the COVID topics for a short period of time. But the total volume of cybercrime remained largely the same, although we saw some gradual increase as we saw the cyber criminals taking advantage of the fact that people were engaging in even more activity online than they had in the past. And we did see cyber criminals, though, really engaged in some very specific campaigns taking advantage of COVID-19. And this was despite the fact that a number of the cybercrime syndicates announced early on that they were not going to take advantage of the pandemic in conducting their activity. But they quickly broke that pledge and began to use COVID-19 themed attacks, especially in ransomware attacks. So you can see on this timeline that we saw some of the major botnets in using COVID-19 to get their malware onto victim computers. The Emotet botnet started that way back last February, and TrickBot started using COVID-19 lures in March and became the most prolific malware operation that was using COVID-19 themed lures. And we saw increasing attacks on healthcare system by cyber criminals as early as April. And then later on in November, we saw attacks on vaccine researching organizations and others involved in treatment and creating treatments for COVID-19, all of which I authored a blog on that we posted on Microsoft on the issues about the nation states that were engaged in those kinds of attacks. And we'll talk more about that later. The consistent use of COVID-19, though, as a theme remained a pattern of cyber criminals throughout the course of the year. And as we got into the fall, we at Microsoft in our digital crimes unit decided that we could take a step to try to reduce the volume of cybercrime that was using COVID-19 lures and really tried to address one of the principal, and as I said earlier, most prolific distributor of malware, especially ransomware. And that was the TrickBot botnet. And we actually started that project very early in the year because it takes many months for the team in our digital crimes unit to research the architecture that these botnets use to conduct their work and to conduct their schemes to infect and control victim computers. We have to understand the architecture of their command and control systems in great detail so that we can understand what we can do using legal techniques that the Digital Crimes Unit has pioneered and has deployed over many, many years now to disrupt this botnet. So we launched that effort this fall. It took a month. It took about a month of activity to really take that botnet down because of the complexity of its command and control structure. But we were determined to shut down that particular botnet and to make sure that the ransomware that it was distributing was not available to use to disrupt the US presidential election. So that had a lot to do with the timing of our effort and our focus on TrickBot as a major distributor of ransomware. And we succeeded ultimately in getting that architecture shut down. The individuals behind TrickBot continue to engage in cyber criminal activity, as we knew they would. But we wanted to shut down that architecture and especially disrupt its ability to distribute ransomware during the fall of 2020. And it took the team a significant amount of work and really 24/7 attention and a global network of partners that we worked with to ensure that we could use legal techniques to take away and shut down the command and control structure that TrickBot was using. As I mentioned, ransomware was an important focus for us, and that's because we are seeing this incredible growth that I'm sure all of you have seen as well in the deployment and use of ransomware really around the world. Just as a couple of data points, we have at Microsoft a detection and response team. We call it DART, and that team engages with enterprises and organizations that have been the victim of cybercrime attacks or nation state attacks, any kind of cybercrime attack. When they invite us in to help them, this team goes in and brings our very best hunting teams and response teams to help customers respond to the attacks that they have suffered from. And that team noted that ransomware was the most common reason for our engagements during the period from October 2019 to July 2020. And I know anecdotally from talking to the DART team, that has continued since that period of time up to today. We've seen the ransomware syndicates engaging in these broad campaigns, attacking a wide variety of targets. And we've learned that they do that by gathering intelligence over a long period of time through these sweeps of the internet, looking for vulnerable entry points. And they bank that information, and then they design attack programs that they launch when they think it will be most advantageous. And they look at factors like what's going on in the world, how sensitive is the data that we're going to be able to encrypt with ransomware at any given point in time, and therefore how likely is it that we will get paid rather than having the victims seek to try to reestablish through backups or to try to combat us in some other way. As the cybercrime syndicate, we want to increase the probability that we're going to get paid with each attack that we perform. So they run their effort as a very sophisticated business. They evaluate their return on investment. They consider their strategy, and they are really good at launching cybercrime attacks and ultimately way too often getting paid for their crime. So this is an area of high focus. And at Microsoft, we've recently decided to really launch a cybercrime program. We have joined with others in the industry in a coalition to combat cybercrime. And we are working in the Digital Crimes Unit with a team that is cooperating with the rest of our Defender teams across Microsoft to really target ransomware as a problem that our customers are facing. So as I mentioned, we also are seeing nation state attacks that are not necessarily cybercrime attacks, but they are espionage attacks or sometimes disruption attacks or attacks that are intended to actually cause harm to the victims that are being attacked. And we recently published this data, which covers the period from July of 2019 through June of 2020. And it's really interesting to observe where the attacks are coming from, where the attacks are focused, and which sectors are being attacked. And as you can see here in the top left corner, during that time, we saw about half of the total nation state attacks that we detected coming from Russia. About a quarter were then coming from Iran, and then the rest from China, North Korea, and others. And the geographic regions of the victims being attacked were largely in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom, Canada, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and really other locations in the Middle East, especially attacks coming from Iran, which during that time period were very focused on the energy sector. And if you look at the kinds of entities that were attacked, you see that a lot of the entities attacked were non-governmental organizations, professional services companies, then government organizations, international organizations, the technology sector, and academia. It's very interesting to note that missing from that are key private enterprises. And in fact, over 90% of the nation state attacks that we saw during this time were outside of critical infrastructure sectors. Now, this is based on the data that Microsoft has available to us, but it is important to note that most of this nation state attack during this time was focused on governmental sectors and organizations that support or interact with governmental agencies. We often see nation state actors start by attacking advisors, consulting companies of various kinds, academics who are trusted by their ultimate governmental target. And by first attacking successfully those other organizations that may have less stringent security provisions in place, they can then pretend to be one of the actors, one of the individuals within those organizations, send email that looks authentic because really it is authentic. It's just being sent by the attacker who's in the network of that organization or that university. And they send that to the ultimate victim, which is the governmental organization, and gain a much higher chance that that email will be trusted and that the recipient will click on the link that says something like, look at this important nuclear proliferation study, and they'll click on that document, and now they're infected with the attacker's malware. And we see that attack vector happening often. But since the time that we pulled this data together, we've had another example of a nation state attack that's had a lot of publicity, and I'll spend a little time now talking to you about that one because of the significance and sophistication of the attack. And that's the one that's known most publicly as the SolarWinds attack. So let's start first by talking about how this attack occurred, because we can learn a lot from understanding how these attacks are happening. That helps us understand how to defend against them. This was a very sophisticated attack, and it was very concerning because it attacked the update system that was being used by the company SolarWinds to update its customers. So the very process that we need, that SolarWinds needed, but really the entire IT industry needs in order to keep our customers safe and their systems most updated, that system of trust was compromised by this attacker. And what they did is when they first compromised the SolarWinds environment, they put in a small piece of code that watched very carefully for when the next build of an update to the SolarWinds Orion software product was launched. So within SolarWinds, they watched to see when the next update was going to be built, was going to be pulled together from code, and they inserted their malware into the binary of that build process, not into the source tree or the source repository itself where it might get detected, but they actually dropped it into the build process itself. And in that way, when that package got signed by SolarWinds and distributed to its customers as a package that was authentic, that was from SolarWinds, that could be trusted, those customers who downloaded that update from March to June of this year, of 2020, actually, of last year, they were infected with the malware from the attacker. And SolarWinds has said that that was approximately 18,000 customers total worldwide. Now, interestingly, one of the first things that software did was the malware did that the attacker put in to SolarWinds and had in these 18,000 networks was it did nothing. It sat for 14 days. And that was so that it could avoid detection. And one of the things that we see about this entire attack is that the attacker was very sophisticated about covering their tracks, about operating in ways that really helped them avoid detection. The next thing that the attacker did was they had to make a decision. Would they do anything with the infected customer, or would they do more investigation? And in the vast majority of cases, they actually have done nothing. At Microsoft, we took steps to block the efficiency of this attack because we identified the malware, we built signatures that we put out in Windows Defender, and all the other IAV companies also built signatures so that their customers could identify this malware in their environment. And we sent out those signatures, and then we ultimately blocked the actual operation of that update so that those who were impacted could be safe from further attack. But that wasn't until many months later when this attack was discovered. At this point, in June, July, and August of 2020, the attacker had not yet been discovered. And what they then could decide is this a particular device that we've infected? Is it worth further action by us? And the first thing the malware did on the infected device was it sent a message back to the attackers with some descriptive information that told the attackers a lot about the environment in which that infected device was located. Then the attacker could decide if they thought that that was one that they were interested in. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how they selected their ultimate targets. But if they were interested, then they dropped down this teardrop backdoor. They closed the initial backdoor so that that could not get discovered. And that backdoor then took down some Cobalt Strike-based malware that allowed the attacker to explore the environment they were in. They then could decide whether to stay on premises. Could they find the stuff they were interested in there? Or did they find that the victim that they were working on actually had cloud services like Office 365 that had data, or would likely have data, that as the attacker they would be interested in accessing? And if they were interested in going to the cloud, they used a variety of different techniques, and we're learning about more and more techniques that this attacker has used. But they used a variety of techniques to gain the privileges necessary to steal or take the credentials that authorized them to move out to the cloud and get access to that cloud data. And they did that in a number of different ways. One that there's been a lot of publicity about is by creating these counterfeit SAML tokens, which are like the electronic passport that systems use. And it's a standard that all cloud services rely on to provide the authentication that says, yes, I'm a valid account, or yes, I'm a valid application. And then the cloud service relies on that and gives access to the cloud service. That's one technique they used. They also infected other services and applications that were present on the device that give them access to cloud services. Then once they were out in the cloud or on premises, wherever they found data that was of interest, they could exfiltrate that data. And we've seen that in many of the victims where they got access to data, they were present for many months before they were detected. So who were the victims of the SolarWinds attack? Well, we actually don't know for sure the total number of victims because different companies have different visibility because we've got different customers and different environments in which we support our customers. At Microsoft, our threat teams and our Microsoft Threat Information Center team that we call Mystic, that tracks the activity of nation state actors, quickly started looking for how can we identify who's been compromised by this actor. And we found some very subtle patterns. They tried to hide an authentic traffic pattern, and because they had stolen credentials, they actually looked like they were valid actors. But we found patterns within the data of their access to cloud services that we could sort through in vast quantities of data that we retain relative to our customers' interaction with their online, their service accounts. And we were able to see those patterns, see where our customers had been compromised by this actor, and then notify them, consistent with our practice of always notifying customers when we see them threatened or compromised by a nation state actor. In our case, we've identified about 60 customers we've now notified through this nation state notification process because we've seen evidence that they've been compromised. That includes some United States government entities, four foreign government entities, and the rest are private sector. But as you can see in this pie chart, this attack was very much focused on government agencies, and those agencies, government agencies trust and rely on. That's about half of the pie chart. And the other half are information and communication technology companies, but especially companies involved in cybersecurity. So there was a very focused attack here by this attacker to understand how people are securing their environment, what they're doing to secure their environment, and whether they could compromise those pathways, as well as to actually get into government and trusted agency and organization environments so that they could look at email, they could steal data and information, and conduct the espionage operation that they were engaged in. So who was this attacker that was engaged in this espionage work? We actually don't know for sure. We have a suspicion. The United States government has said they believe this actor is likely Russian in origin, and we and the others in the private sector have seen data that largely confirms that suspicion. So we believe it was a very sophisticated nation state actor operating from Russia, probably one of several that our team tracks their activity on a regular basis. But they were very skilled, they covered their tracks, and they were very successful in this attack. Most troubling, though, was that the attack compromised this trusted process of the update process that all software vendors need to be able to use and need their customers to trust. And so we need to take steps within the cybersecurity ecosystem with nation states to understand how we can build rules that nation states will abide by that prohibit this kind of attack going forward. To do that, we have to partner with the public sector. And really, to advance the cause of cybersecurity, we have to partner with the public sector across all aspects of cybersecurity. I wrote a blog in November about stopping these attacks that nation states were then engaged in that I mentioned earlier on the companies involved in developing COVID-19 vaccines or treatments. We also endorsed the United Nations chief who called for a global ceasefire during the time of the pandemic so that we could really focus the energy of the global community on combating the pandemic. And unfortunately, not all nation states agreed or abided by that call for a ceasefire. But we work closely with the public sector, with government agencies in the United States and around the world on ways that we can cooperate, how we can share threat intelligence and incident response information. And we encourage them to share similar information back. Despite that, and despite some strong partnerships we have with certain public sector agencies, there's a great deal of work that we need to do in this space. Even in the United States, among US government agencies, there is not enough or agile enough sharing of information relevant to cybersecurity or to responding to attack. And between the public and private sectors, there still is not robust enough and fast enough sharing of similar kinds of information so that both the private sector and the public sector can partner together to both defend against and respond to nation state attacks. And in this space, maybe unique to all forms of the defense and the national interest, it's critical that we have this partnership. Government has the legal authority and the power and the commitment to protecting the public interest. The private sector, though, has a unique view of what is happening in the digital ecosystem. And the private sector largely owns, operates, and protects that digital ecosystem. So it's really critical in this particular effort that we have stronger, better partnerships. And we are working together with others to try to build those partnerships and those communication channels so that we can do even better in defending against and responding to these kinds of attacks. We've seen these attacks not just in healthcare, but we reported on attacks against the presidential campaigns last fall. And we worked together in what was a very positive private-public partnership together with the CISA department in the Department of Homeland Security that was very focused on ensuring that the presidential election was safe and secure and was not successfully attacked by any nation state. We put a lot of effort into that project, working with government agencies, training the state and local officials who actually conduct our elections to make sure that they knew how they could be safe and secure against cyber attack, and having war rooms established in private entities and in government leading up to and during the election itself so we could respond rapidly in case any attack came forward. The good news is that there was no nation state attack that was observed by any government agency or any private sector cybersecurity company that attacked the election process itself. And we agree with the statement that was made by the then director of CISA that this was a safe and secure election, in part due to this great collaboration we had with the private sector to make sure that this election was not vulnerable to attack. That kind of partnership, that kind of collaboration and coordination of effort, we need to see advance across all other domains of cybersecurity, not just elections. And we need to double down on the work that we're doing to keep elections safe and secure and trustworthy as we move forward. To that end, at Microsoft, we have a Defending Democracy program that we established shortly after the 2016 presidential election, when we saw evidence of Russian nation-state actors infiltrating the campaigns and attempting to influence outcomes of the election, and most importantly, to try to reduce the trust of the American people in our electoral process. Today, we know that we have work to do to reestablish trust of millions of Americans in the electoral process. And there are programs that we've launched through the Defending Democracy project here at Microsoft that we think can help address this. One is Microsoft Account Guard. And this is a program we've now had for a couple of years, but that is now monitoring more than 1 million accounts. It's available in 30 countries worldwide, in which campaigns, healthcare providers, and a number of others can opt into this process where we carefully watch to see if any nation-state actor is threatening or attacking your accounts, your Office 365 accounts, and any other consumer accounts, Microsoft consumer accounts, that people associated with your enterprise, your organization, or your campaign use to communicate with you. That extends the scope of the protection that we can provide and the notification we can provide. And we amplify that with training and resources to help the participants in Microsoft Account Guard operate safely and securely, really focused on defending democracy and defending the medical response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have technology that we invented that is called Election Guard. This is technology that helps people vote in a safe and secure way. It uses advanced encryption to encrypt your vote the moment your vote is converted to an electronic record. So if you vote in a place where they use voting machines, the minute that you enter your vote into the voting machine, Election Guard would encrypt that vote. So it would be hard, very hard for an attacker to modify or change your vote in any way. Or if you are in a jurisdiction where they use paper ballots, those ballots are typically then scanned into an electronic record and counted in that way. Because frankly, machines count much better and more trustworthy, in a much more trustworthy manner than people can count. And so in most jurisdictions, the actual counting of the ballots, even if they use paper ballots, are done by scanning and using a machine to then count those ballots. We can also encrypt that electronic record with ElectionGuard technology. But more important than the encryption is what's called end-to-end verifiability. This is technology that we build into ElectionGuard, and any device or system that utilizes our ElectionGuard technology that enables that vote to not only stay secure and private at all times, but it allows the voter, him or herself, to confirm when the election is complete that their vote was counted and not altered. And you can see the importance of that technology to the trustworthiness of our elections, especially today when we're emerging from an election when so many people believed for some reason these conspiracy theories about how the vote was changed or altered in some way, none of which have any factual basis. But if you as a voter and your neighbor as a voter and the guy in the bar that you're having an argument with about politics as a voter all know that your votes were in fact counted and not changed, and you can confirm that, that makes it much harder to believe these crazy conspiracy theories, and it gives voters a great deal of trust in the outcome of the election. And our ElectionGuard technology is free. It's an open source project, and we're working today with a number of vendors, both in the US and in locations in other democracies around the world. And we hope to have ElectionGuard technology adopted and deployed in many elections hopefully in the near future. Now, a lot of the data that I've talked about today is from our Microsoft Digital Defense report that I mentioned earlier. And that is a report that we put together and published last September, and you can download it at the link shown on this slide, because we wanted to pull together all the data and information we have across all the cybersecurity communities here at Microsoft, and pull together the insights we could derive from that data and publish it to benefit the public interest and the defense of the digital ecosystem. And in that report, we basically have these 4 chapters, one about cybercrime, one about nation state threats, including some of the data we talked about today, about security in the remote workforce, and what we've seen about this dramatic shift from working at facilities to working from home, and the implications of that for cybersecurity. And finally, actionable learnings and specific recommendations for what people, enterprises, and organizations can do to better secure themselves against cyber attacks and cybercrime. And the reason that we decided to publish that is because of the unique insights that we have at Microsoft, given our participation in the digital ecosystem. As you can see depicted on this chart, we literally get trillions of signals that come into our network every day. And those signals are then processed and evaluated by our teams across the company for a variety of different purposes and different reasons, but for the basic fundamental reason of attempting to see whether there is anomalous conduct, whether there's activity going on in that ecosystem that suggests that there's cybercrime or nation state attacks or some other unfortunate activity underway that we can use to better protect our customers. We use this data to build better and stronger security technology in our products and services. We also use this data to find the nation state attacks that we talked about earlier and to notify our customers when we see that they're under attack. But we thought we could also take this data and pull the insights together that we see from all of that and publish it each year to help everyone understand what we're seeing and how we can be more secure. As just one subset of that data is the data that we see specifically related to our Office 365 cloud services. And here, again, we scan trillions of messages. We block billions of malicious emails during the course of a year. And we interfere with phishing attacks that we see, identify, and block. And we block payloads that we see where we see attachments that appear to be malicious attachments. We actually block those so that they can't be successful in conducting phishing attacks. In the past, we saw cyber criminals doing a great deal of malware attacks. And as we've enhanced our ability to block those, we see them shifting to phishing attacks. And that's why you see the emphasis here on what we can do with this data to help us identify phishing emails, identify the malign payloads that are with those phishing emails, and block that to protect our customers. Now, as much as we can do to try to defend our customers and to help them respond to attacks, and those are the things we've been talking about mostly so far today, we also invest a lot of time and energy trying to improve the security of the entire global digital ecosystem by improving the policies and laws that are used around the world to both help protect our customers and the ecosystem and to ensure that nation states act appropriately in cyberspace. And one of the things that we've done in our work around the globe to advocate for stronger policies and stronger cybersecurity is we were very strong proponents of what became called the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. And what this really was a set of 9 cybersecurity principles. And the French government, as part of a convention that they were holding to focus on global peace, proposed that we get governments and private sector and civil society to endorse and agree to abide by those principles. Microsoft was a strong proponent of this effort, and we worked with our resources around the world to encourage governments and companies and civil society to consider signing the Paris Call principles. And today, it is the largest multilateral, multi-stakeholder statement of cybersecurity principles that has ever existed, with over 1,000 total signatories to the Paris Call principles, including 75 governments. And that includes 4 of the so-called Five Eyes governments, our closest allies. Unfortunately, the one of those 5 that's missing is the United States government, which has not yet signed the Paris Call. And we will be working with the new administration to try to convince the US government of the benefits of this collaborative effort to abide by and endorse these cybersecurity principles. And we are working today with all of those entities that have signed those principles to organize communities of interest around each one of the 9 principles that are now working on how we can further develop the principle and the rules of law and policy and the norms of behavior that we need nation states and all of us in private sector and civil society to abide by in order to improve the level of cybersecurity across all the digital ecosystem. That's just one of the many efforts that we are taking. And regarding those communities of interest, by the way, the ones that we're focusing on at Microsoft are these 3: how we protect citizens, how we protect elections, and how to protect the core of the internet itself. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about the Paris Peace Forum, which it comes back every November, but also specifically about the Paris Call, the link here on this slide will give you all the information you need about the Paris Call, how you or your organization can endorse it if you haven't already. And we encourage broad support for the Paris Call and the good work that it's doing. We continue to advocate for these enforceable rules to govern nation state conduct through the Paris Call effort, through working with legal experts on international law that come together in efforts such as one that was recently put together at Oxford University to really examine how international law protects against cyber attacks threatening healthcare and threatening elections. And that Oxford effort is one that we endorse, and we're working hard to further the effort to get clear consensus globally on international law protections for cyberspace. On top of all of that, the security of the digital ecosystem really starts with what each of us and each of our enterprises and organizations can do to protect ourselves. We continuously find, as we look through those trillions of signals and as we look at specific cybercrime attacks or nation state attacks, that the vulnerabilities that make those attacks possible are all too often, they start and end with a failure to maintain basic cybersecurity hygiene. And it's important that we all step up and take the steps we need to protect ourselves, because what we find is that by protecting ourselves, we protect the ecosystem. What can you do? There's several really core things that you can do to protect yourself and your organization. One is adopt multi-factor authentication. Our identity team did an analysis about a year ago, but they looked carefully at all of the cyber attacks that we could see in our data. And they concluded that over 99% of those attacks would not have been successful if the victim had had multi-factor authentication on all of their accounts. This applies to us both as enterprises, but also in our private lives, where we need to make sure we've got multi-factor authentication established for our communication accounts, for our financial accounts, for any account where your private information or anything that you care about is maintained. It's possible on virtually every account today to establish multi-factor authentication, and we strongly recommend that you do that, in addition to other basic password hygiene, like having strong passwords. But multi-factor authentication is actually a stronger protection for you and your accounts than having a strong password, and that's what our data demonstrated a year ago. It's important that you adopt a zero trust mindset, and this is particularly true for enterprises and organizations. It's what we do here at Microsoft. We assume that the attacker can compromise our environment, and then you need to work to structure your environment to make it hard for the attacker to have any success once they are in. So we do things like least privileged access, where we carefully ensure that each person who has access to our network has only the privileges to access those network resources they absolutely need to do their job and do their job well, but no more. And that's because what we see with these sophisticated nation state actors, like the one that we talked about in the SolarWinds attack, those actors, one of the first things they do is look for accounts that have high privileges. That gives them the ability to move rapidly through the network and access any resources in the network that they seek to get. So that's important, as is network segmentation, creating your network, architecting it in such a way that it's hard for an attacker to move among resources. And of course, it's critical that everyone patch your applications and your systems. That is the best way to have the most up-to-date and secure system, whether it's the applications you use at home or those applications and systems you use at your companies or in your enterprises or organizations. So thank you very much for your time and your attention today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing at Microsoft to address our cybersecurity threats and what we can all do together to improve the cybersecurity of the digital ecosystem. We need to work together. We need to continue to develop better defenses through the application of machine learning and AI technologies, which we at Microsoft are doing, and many in the digital ecosystem are doing, to try to build better defenses and better products and services to help you be more secure. But that's not enough. We need a stronger partnership with the private sector and the public sector to address cybersecurity. We need to advance the rules that govern nation-state conduct in cyberspace. We need to address cybercrime. And each of us and each of our enterprises and organizations need to take the steps that we can take to improve our own cybersecurity hygiene in order to protect ourselves better, and in doing that, protect the entire digital ecosystem. But I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you very much.